So I might be the luckiest person on earth because I just got to interview at a festival recently a real NASA astronaut, someone who's been to space not once, but twice. And she spent over 3 months up there living on the International Space Station, doing all kinds of experiments. Oh, she also lived under the sea for a while. She's probably the coolest person I've ever had the opportunity to speak to. Now, I just want to precursor it with, for some reason, I didn't decide to record our conversation until the very last minute. So I literally just asked someone, hey, can I borrow your camera, and just set it up there. So the image quality is not very good. The sound's not great either. The camera even shuts off halfway through for like 5 minutes. So I've had to do some weird editing, but it doesn't matter. The point is I'm talking with an astronaut about her life and all the cool things that she does. So check it out. I hope you enjoy it. There she is. Thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be
everybody. Nicole, that's a really interesting transition, going sort of from being a scientist for your whole career to an artist. How do you find these two schools of thought work together?
Well, I personally think there's no conflict between the two. And I don't know, in the simplest way, I like to think about, and I try to tell my son too, is that you need to use your whole brain. And so to me, the art and the science, the art and like spacey kinds of things, technical things, all come together so nicely. And I also think, and you mentioned that when I retired, I went on to do this art work of my own and working with some other people. I think that art is this, it's like a universal communicator, whether it's music or paintings or, or sculpture. You can engage with audiences that you might not be able to otherwise. And certainly for me, and wanting to share the spaceflight experience, I know there's a lot of people out there that don't even know we have a space station. So if I can use my art and then as a way to lure them in, whether they like it or not, whether they really think my art is any good or not, but if I can lure them in with it and then share that backstory of having flown in space and what we're doing in space that's all about improving life on Earth, I think that's a really good thing.
Why is it so important that, because I mean, obviously you've had the unique experience of seeing the Earth from space. What, is there like a specific perspective or sort of feeling that you got from that you feel is important to let others know about?
Yeah, definitely. And I think anybody who's had that opportunity feels the same way. They may want to express it a little bit differently. But nothing prepared me for what I saw and felt when I looked out at the window and saw Earth from space. I think, I was separated further away from the planet in a way than I ever would probably be again in my life. And yet I felt more connected to everything and everyone below me than I had right down in the middle of it. And I think that happens to us, perhaps like at this festival, people are separating themselves, they're looking at things from a new perspective and appreciating things in a different way. We do a lot of really complex things in space, whether it's how we get there, how we live there, the science we're doing. And yet, when I came home from space, there were 3 very simple lessons that seemed to go along with it for me. And that's that we live on a planet, we're all Earthlings, and the only border that matters is that thin blue line of atmosphere that blankets us all. And I think that's something we all know intellectually, and yet I don't remember really processing that every day. And I do now, and I really want everybody to feel that way, to think about yourself there and the fact that you are on a planet in space with everyone else together. It's a pretty profound thing.
Absolutely. Thank you. So tell us a bit about what was your daily routine on the ISS? If you had such a thing, did you have a daily routine? Because obviously days are very different there, right?
Yeah, there is a daily routine, and I'll just start, with where you said that, days are very different. We still work to a 24-hour clock, just like we would down here on Earth. We work to what I think is your local time, to GMT, which makes it nice for the people on the planet to have a standard, and for us too. As you can imagine, though, we're going around the Earth 16 times a day. at 5 miles a second, 17,500 miles an hour. So, and every 90 minutes. So every 45 minutes or so, we get this beautiful sunrise or sunset out the window. So you can't really use, day-night as your gauge for, for the time passing. And so we work off of the timeline that's given to us from the ground, really following along on the computer. And then, your belly tells you when you're hungry, your head tells you when you're tired, and you kind of get into a routine that way. But otherwise, every day is different. And that's one of the things I really loved about it, is because every day there was a mix of science and maintenance and outreach activities like this, speaking to people on the ground. But it was always a different mix of those things. And on top of it, because we can't fly as many people yet, we can't fly the medical doctor and the electrician and the scientist, we are all of those people. And so we're doing something different every day, and we're getting to get, everything from fixing the toilet to doing some research activity for a scientist on the ground, which is really cool.
So I imagine your training must have almost covered everything, but was there anything that happened that really surprised you, or any experience that you had?
I think there was a lot that surprised me because, our training is really, really good. One thing I will say about it is, we do training in all these simulators on the ground because sadly you can't fly in space to learn how to fly in space yet. And I was so pleased to find that when I floated from the space shuttle onto the space station, it felt familiar, except that I was floating, it felt familiar. Even the smells were kind of the same, and, what I expected to see and hear was kind of the same. So that was nice. But there were loads of surprises too, because, for instance, there's nothing that we do down here on Earth that can really prepare you for what it feels like to float in space, to fly, to be liberated that way. It's just amazing. There's, like I said, there's nothing that prepares you for that view out the window, just how stunning and glowing and colorful the Earth is, and the fact that you realize we're on a planet. That's pretty impressive. And I would say there were things like the smell of space that nobody had told me about. And that's not that you can float out the hatch and take your helmet off and smell space, but because that would be bad.
It wouldn't go well.
But, you wouldn't come back in.
Not much to smell either, probably.
Yeah, nobody would know. But when things would come into the space station that had been exposed to space, they all had kind of this sweet metallic smell that nobody had told me about. And that's whether it was like a spacesuit, after doing a spacewalk, or the hatch of a new vehicle that had docked. It all had this really interesting, not bad, but kind of interesting smell.
What do you think caused that? Is there some kind of sort of chemical process going on in the depressurization, or?
I don't really know. Nobody has really told me, but what I've heard is like maybe a reaction with like atomic oxygen and the different materials, and who knows, but it was cool. It was very interesting to see that was what, regardless of what it was, it had that smell.
Wow.
And then I think there was one thing that I really, really wasn't prepared for was, looking out the window. It was a night pass, so it was night down on Earth. And that's always really beautiful. And I was by myself in the window, and I saw this, flash of light go by. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what was that? And of course, you always get the alien question. I can tell you, not that I know of, didn't see any, as far as I know. They may have seen me, I don't know. But so I see this flash of light, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what was that? It was really beautiful. And so I float down, ask my crewmates. They're like, oh yeah, shooting star. You'll see him every now and then below you. I was like, wow. Go back to the window, and like we do when we're down here on Earth, when I see a shooting star at night, looking up in the sky, I want to see another one. So I'm in the window, like wanting to see another one. And of course there's not another one. And I just sat there for a little while thinking about it. Again, like nobody had told me about this. It was this really beautiful surprise. And then I remember thinking, wow, I'm really glad I saw that, because that means it didn't hit my spaceship, which could have been a really bad thing. And you don't want to hit your spaceship. So yeah, lots of surprises.
What were some of the experiments you were working on while you were there?
Wow, we had, and there's even more now. I think when we were there, crew of 6, we had about 150 to 200 different research activities going on at any different time on the space station. And some of those we're very actively involved in. We're actually the experiment. They'll wire us up some way to see if we still have a brain, have a heart, and how that's changing in space. And then pretty much any area of science that you could think of, there was something going on there. There were protein crystal growth experiments looking at, different vaccines and, how to create medicines that are more effective, because you can build those crystal structures in the microgravity environment more perfectly than we can down here on Earth. There were combustion experiments. We had this combustion chamber, so cool that inside it every day where there was these different mixtures of fuels burning. And things that burn in space, they burn like a sphere, not like a kind of a teardrop like we see down here. And so that allows the scientists to look at the interaction between the different components in a new way and, discover ways to have fuels that pollute less or are more, more efficient. And I think the thing that, is really exceptional about it to me is that it's two things. One is that we go to space because we can take gravity out of the equation. And we can look at these things we thought we knew all about in a whole new way and discover new things about them. And two is that every bit of science, every bit of the way we've built the space station and how we're working together as international partners up there, everything about it is ultimately about improving life here on Earth. And I think that's a really cool thing to be a part of.
Is there one particular experiment that hasn't been done yet that you'd love to see happen?
Oh, wow. That hasn't been done. I don't know.
One, I was reading recently that we haven't figured out whether mammals are able to reproduce in space, for example. I was really surprised to hear that, there weren't, as far as I know, they haven't put mice in space, for example, or any animal that has a sort of short gestation period. Is there a reason for that?
We've had the animals in space. I flew the first time. We took up 6 mice on the space shuttle, and then I took care of them while we were up there, and then we brought them back on my ride home. And I'll tell you, just as cool as we are as creatures, and the way our bodies and our brains adapt to new environments, these little mice did the same thing. I mean, they just got it. When they got to space, they just figured out how to float, and they, were doing their thing. I don't know that and I don't think we've done any kind of reproductive experiments in space where we actually, have the animal and they're pregnant or go through that cycle. None of that do I know of. There may be, some embryonic stuff that's been done. I think it's because we just don't know yet how that's going to work. And I think there's ethical things around that, and just in the way we have animals on the station and in space, that I'm thankful we're thoughtful about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So as a poker player, I'm pretty used to risk.
I need to learn some lessons from you, by the way. I'm not good at that at all.
I'm giving a talk tomorrow. You can listen in. So obviously I'm used to risk and so on, but you're dealing with risk on a whole other level. There's an inherent risk to life in not only space flight, but also you did spacewalks. Were you sort of, I assume you were, told of the sort of probabilities of death inherent in your missions? Were you aware of them? If so, what were they? And how did you sort of manage that risk internally in your mind?
Yeah, I think I was told the numbers. I honestly don't remember them now. They're not high. I mean, they're high in terms of the risk. They're not high in terms of, the safety of it. I think anybody who does this knows there's this inherent risk to it. But I think it comes back to what I was saying before about what we're doing there and the value of it. And I can tell you, when I flew the first time, my son was 7 years old. I cannot imagine strapping onto a rocket with 7 million pounds of rocket thrust, underneath you, and just doing it for the fun or for the adventure of it. I can tell you it's fun and it's adventurous. But if there wasn't some element of, in fact, if the majority of the reason wasn't associated with some element of greater good, and that's what went through my mind, is what I'm going to do in space going to benefit my son and his future? And I know that it does. That was the rationale for me, was that, what we're doing there is about creating a better future for everyone. And on top of that, I worked very closely in one of my first jobs with NASA at the Kennedy Space Center with the people who build and maintain and take care of, and who honestly believe the care and feeding of these spacecraft is their responsibility. And I don't think there's anything more than that you can do, besides getting the numbers to understand, kind of that risk reward. And I really feel like the reward significantly outweighs the risk that we have going on with spaceflight.
Did you have any, was there like one particularly scary moment or anything that happened?
Well, we had, on the space station, I would say there were probably 3 or 4 times where I remember being woken up in the middle of the night. It always happens like 3 o'clock in the morning, right? And, the emergency alarm is going off, and of course, when we train for emergencies in space, there's a lot of things that can hurt you, kill you, cause problems, but we focus on 3 things as emergencies, and that's fire, toxic atmosphere, so like ammonia, highly concentrated ammonia getting into the environment, or depressurization, which is why I would worry about that shooting star hitting my spaceship and putting a big hole in it so all the air goes spewing out into the vacuum of space. And 3 or 4 times had one of those emergency alarms go off in the middle of the night. And I can tell you, it gets your adrenaline pumping, certainly. But I found it was in a good way. And I think that's because of all the training that we've done as a crew. Almost all of our training in one way or another is about how do you work as a team, and how do you work as a team when it's hitting the fan, which it will. And I was so pleased to see how 3 o'clock in the morning, everyone floats out of their crew compartment. We make sure we have all crew members, accounted for. We all then disperse and do what we train to do on the ground, and we do it like we did on the ground, and we're treating it like it's real until it's resolved. And that was a really reassuring thing, because when stuff was going on that was communicating to you that something real is happening, there's a fire, there's a depressurization, that's the kind of people you want to be with. You want to be with them when you're having fun and enjoying it, but you want to know that you're all going to rally for each other in a way that, takes care of the situation. And thankfully, we didn't have anything that caused us to have to evacuate the station, or that caused any harm to us or to the station in a way that compromised the mission. So, that was a good thing.
So going from the extreme vacuum of space, you went to the other extreme. You went under the sea for 18 days in this high pressure environment.
I, in hindsight, found that I felt the same way from that experience about, seeing the Earth around me. It's like I was surrounded by the planet, in that case, versus in space, kind of being the one that's surrounding it, above it and looking down. That same kind of perspective as I had in space of, wow, this is a planet, and we're all on it, and it's here and purposely built to allow me to survive. Was a really great thing. And then coming up, I felt like I could have stayed down there a lot longer. It's like I was the one in the aquarium, and all the fish and the creatures there were looking at it like, hey, who's in there now, And you got to be part of, that whole scene there with with these creatures that are in their natural home and we are not. And the same is true in space, although I didn't see any creatures out the window.
That we know of, yeah.
That we know of, yeah.
So we're starting to see I find it very exciting, a renewed space race, but instead of it being between countries, as it was a few decades ago, it's now between private companies, with like Blue Origin and SpaceX, seemingly taking space technology to new levels. So I'm curious to know sort of what your thoughts on this. Are there pros and cons, and how do you feel about the sort of privatization of space in that way?
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I'm here on the west coast of Florida, and so I see these launches going off on the East Coast, and it's really cool to know that all of this is building up again. I think the interesting thing right now is that we're not quite at a stage of privatization. We're at a partnership stage where kind of this public-private thing going on in a little bit different way. I mean, we've always had that. Even when we went to the moon, or we built the space shuttle or the space station, we've always, as NASA, as the government, has always worked with private companies to make these things happen. Now we're just doing it in a way where instead of NASA owning the spaceship afterwards, the company does. And then they have the flexibility to develop other business models and do other things with it that expand beyond what NASA as a government agency could do. And I think that's really exciting. The downside to me, if anything, is that we need to make sure that we don't relearn the same lessons we already learned before. Because we have companies or people or organizations working that didn't have that same experience. And we need to leverage all of those lessons learned, because there's so much out there that could hurt us that we don't know about that's associated with that risk of flying in space, that we don't need to learn the same things over again.
Yeah, I mean, to me it feels like it's sort of using the best bits of capitalism to advance this. I'm really, really excited about the sort of partnerships we're seeing.
It's why we fly on airplanes the way we do now. I mean, it's that same kind of evolution, I think, that we'll be going through.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you always want to be an astronaut? Was it something you dreamed of from a kid, or did it sort of crop up in your mind later in life?
Well, I think I always thought it was really cool. And, excuse me, my lozenge. I watched the moon landing at six and a half years old. And even then, I think there's something really extraordinary about that going on. Walking out and looking at the moon and seeing it and knowing that there's people up there. For me, though, it was more about flying. I was really excited about flying. I wanted to know how things fly. And while I was going to school for that at university, it kind of clicked maybe a little late. I'm like, wow, if you want to know how airplanes fly, why would you not want to know how rocket ships fly? Right. And that led me to my job with NASA as an engineer. And it really wasn't until I was working there, probably, again, slow, like 9 into the 10 years of working at Kennedy Space Center and seeing astronauts come through and getting spaceships ready for them to fly and figuring out that, 99.9% of an astronaut's job, sadly, is not flying in space, and 80% of it was a lot like what I was already doing as an engineer. And that made me start to think that there could be some reality associated with the job. Because up till that point, I always thought, wow, this is really cool. Look what they get to do. But that's some other special person that gets to do that. Why would anybody pick me? Right. And, I second-guessed myself almost out of even applying. And was very thankful to a couple people that I considered to be mentors that encouraged me, nothing more really than just to pick up the pen and fill out the application. And I am very thankful to them.
For the youngsters in the audience who might be considering becoming an astronaut, what steps should they be taking to improve their chances?
Well, going to festivals like the one you're at is really cool. I think there is very much a, kind of a science and arts vibe to what you guys are doing, which is impressive. And you should expose yourself to those kinds of things and those kinds of people. Number one, though, pay attention to what you enjoy. I am in awe of how just paying attention to the fact that I liked flying. I wanted to know how things fly. the opportunities that open up and the people that you'll meet when you pay attention to that, the curiosity that you'll develop and be encouraged by is really awesome. And then, get outside of the books too. You're going to have what you have to do at school, but you need to understand how what you're studying and what you're interested in benefits life around you. What's the real world, the reality application to what you're doing? And those are key things to becoming an astronaut.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, I think it's time to open up some questions to the audience.
Okay.
Lots of hands going up already, if we can get the mic out there.
If there was one more thing that you could go back and do, what would it be?
Oh, in space?
Yeah.
Wow. I think it would be look at the Earth a little bit more and have, I had the chance to paint while I was in space. I painted a watercolor, and I would love to do that again and do it while I was floating in front of the window. I think there's something very human to that, and take my family would be good.
How do you keep the paints together? But don't they fly away?
And I painted with watercolors, so it was kind of fun. You can't dip your brush into a cup of water because there's no cups of water. It's just floating balls of water. So, dip the brush into a little floating ball where you got to keep track of everything, because everything does float. And there were some interesting things about painting with watercolors that I didn't expect. So it took a couple tries.
In the ISS, the crew breathe air. How do they replenish the oxygen?
Well, we do have some tanks on board that, have the oxygen and nitrogen, mixes that blend to do that. We have a couple systems that allow us to recycle, the water, the moisture that's in our environment. And, there's some electrolysis things that go on that allow us to generate the oxygen. And, but we do still, I think, replenish from the ground as well. But we're getting more and more, I should say less and less dependent on that, which is really cool. And the same thing is true for like our drinking water. We used to send all of that up. And now we have systems that allow us to, I think like 96 to 98% of the like wastewater or condensation or sweat or urine that we can recycle into clean drinking water, which is really, really cool. And it applies to providing that same resource to people down here on Earth that don't have it.
So when you applied to be an astronaut, was it a very long sheet to apply? And if so, how many lines, or did you count?
I didn't count the lines, but it's a pretty lengthy application. And, but what I found out is kind of funny is it's the same application that I filled out to be an engineer with NASA too. You just have to think differently about the way you answer the questions with respect to the job that you're applying for. And I always try to tell people to practice filling out that application if they want to apply to be an astronaut, because the questions aren't always asked the way, in an easy way to allow you to give them the information you want to give them about you. Like, for instance, the things you do outside of work or outside of school that make you the person that you are. And ultimately, when they pick you, they'll know that you've satisfied the school and the work requirements, but they want to know who you are and how you'll work with the people on your crew. And, will you be somebody that I'd want to spend 6 months on a space station with? And will I be able to trust that you'll have my back when something goes wrong? And, those kinds of things. So I don't know how many lines, but I would say practice filling it out if you want to do it.
Hi, there's about 120 people here that are all envious of your life experiences, I've got to tell you. But would you go again if the call came?
I would absolutely go again. I can tell you, you can ask me when I'm 95 years old, do I want to fly in space again? And the answer is 100% yes. and as you can imagine, the decision to retire from a job like that was difficult. I was in line to fly again, so I took myself out of that line. And the way I did that was by answering the question, do I need to fly in space again? And the answer is no, I didn't need to. And there were things I wanted to do, like the work I'm doing now with kids in hospitals around the world, where I'm taking two things that I love, space and art, and putting them together. And I think I'm on another really rewarding mission. And but yes, the answer is absolutely yes. And take me with you if you get to go. Thank you.
Did you prefer it when you went into space or you went underwater?
Oh, wow. That's a really difficult question. I think it may not be a preference thing, but it's because it's much more difficult to get to go to space. I think I'd probably have to answer with space, but there's something really, really inspirational about seeing the planet from underwater too, and not. I kind of think of it like I was always a recreational scuba diver, and so I've gone diving before. I've seen underwater life and experienced it, but when you get to live there, kind of be part of it on a longer term basis, there's an impression that's made that's a little bit different. And so I would never turn down the opportunity to go back and live on Aquarius again too.
Hello. I'm just going back to the shooting star episode. I'm wondering how you were able to see a shooting star in space if there's no atmosphere.
I know. So we're above the atmosphere a little bit, kind of at the far reaches of it, and so the line of the atmosphere is below us, and so what you end up seeing is that piece of material re-entering the atmosphere. So you don't see it until it's much lower and below you, but you see the streak down close to Earth, and it's really, really beautiful. And the thing that was kind of boggling my mind a little bit when I saw it was, our brains are so used to seeing things in a particular way. My knowledge of seeing a shooting star is by looking up towards space, not looking down towards Earth. And so it was a little, it was like bewildering to be able to see something like that.
Well, I imagined it was the way you spoke about it. It sort of shot past the portal window.
Oh no, sorry.
Okay.
No, it was below. Now that doesn't mean, we do see things like tiny pieces of debris, small items. We occasionally can catch them out there with us. And it's not good if it's really close to your spaceship and going in the opposite direction. 17,500 miles an hour head on would not be good. Even tiny little, things the size of sand could do damage to the material on the outside of the space station. So we prefer not to see that.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
What was the
Sorry for the confusion.
What was your favorite thing you saw on Earth?
Oh, wow. Awesome question. Can I say everything, first of all? And then I'll top it off with, I think my favorite things to see on Earth were the colors in the ocean. And the colors, so I'll stop. Colors might be the answer. Because it didn't matter if they were in the ocean or out in the middle of the desert, there were these patterns and colors that I just hadn't really even imagined before. And there's a little area on the planet from the southern tip of Florida down to like the northern coast of South America. That was absolutely the most beautiful place I think I'd ever seen. All these blues and turquoises and just glowing little islands and things that really stood out as special to me.